What if one day the wild came to your door, not to beg, not to attack, but to choose you? In the frozen heart of Montana, a lonely wildlife researcher and a cautious bobcat crossed paths in the middle of a blizzard. No words, no promises, just quiet trust born from silence. But when the world finds out, can something this fragile survive? Stay with us. This story will change the way you see the wild and yourself. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy the story, please like and follow. It helps us keep creating more. Your feedback means everything. Thank you. She lived in silence. I lived in solitude. But in the coldest winter of my life, something wild came to my door. The forests of northern Montana had already begun to freeze. Frost clung to the windows of Marin Elwood's cabin, a simple wooden structure tucked into the base of a pine-covered ridge. Each morning, a thin layer of snow dusted the steps, and each night the winds howled like forgotten spirits. The silence was thick. Not the peaceful kind, more like the kind that echoed. Marin was in her early 30s, a field ecologist finishing her thesis on nocturnal mammals in alpine environments. She had come to this isolated corner of the state to escape distraction and find data, but more than that, to find peace. Her dark blonde hair was usually tied back in a loose knot, her face rarely touched by makeup. She wasn't hiding, just tired of noise, of expectations, of people. The forest didn't ask anything from her until one afternoon it did. She was following fresh deer tracks near a frozen stream when something flickered at the edge of her vision, spotted low to the ground, quick. A bobcat. Small. Young. Alone. Marin froze heart-hammering, watching as the creature vanished into the trees. She exhaled slowly, more awe than fear. It should have been the end of it. But that image of the gaunt creature haunted her. Bobcats didn't usually linger near humans. The fact that she had seen it so close meant something wasn't right. Days passed. Marin tried to forget, but the cold deepened, and she couldn't. So one morning, after checking the weather, a blizzard was predicted within the week. She stepped outside with a bundle of dry ferns, an old burlap blanket, and a few sturdy sticks. Underneath her porch, nestled in the curve of a large root system, she constructed a makeshift shelter. That evening, she placed a few chunks of raw chicken, untreated, unseasoned, a few feet away. Then she turned off the porch light and went inside. For several days, nothing changed. The food disappeared some nights, maybe raccoons, maybe not. Marin never watched. She wanted the animal to feel unobserved. Then one morning, just before sunrise, she opened the back door and paused. There in the snowlight, crisp, undeniable paw prints. Not canine, not raccoon, feline. 4 distinct toes, no claw marks. She crouched, tracing them with her eyes. They led to the shelter. And then, back into the forest. Marin didn't smile often, but that morning she did. Not wide. Just a quiet softening of the lips. She didn't change her routine. Everyday food. Every few days she replaced the bedding. She began sitting on the porch sometimes reading, speaking quietly to the wind, hoping that her stillness, her patience might register with the wild creature watching from the shadows. The weather report was clear. The first major blizzard would hit within 48 hours. Marin reinforced the shelter, pushed the food a little closer to the porch. That evening, she brewed tea and sat behind the living room window, book open eyes drifting. Snow began to fall gentle at first, then steadier. And just before dusk, she saw it a shape at the edge of the trees. Low, silent, watching, waiting, not running this time. The storm came fast, and with it, something I never expected. She didn't run. She sat and waited. The wind arrived before the snow. It came in sharp gusts, rattling the edges of the window panes, and hissing through the cracks beneath the porch. Marin watched from the living room firelight, casting golden shadows along the walls. Outside, the sky turned a bruised gray, and the first flakes began to fall sideways, riding the gale. The storm was hours early and far angrier than forecasted. Marin stood slowly moving to the patio door, mug of tea forgotten in her hand. And there she was, Kiva, perched on the top porch step just outside the welcome mat. Her fur was already dusted in white. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't crying. She was just there, still like the snow itself. A creature shaped by the wild, now sitting quietly at a stranger's door. Marin's pulse thudded in her throat. She didn't dare move. This wasn't like before. Kiva wasn't hidden in the brush, wasn't just checking for food. She was closer than ever, vulnerable, trusting, or desperate. Marin didn't know. If she opened the door, would Kiva bolt into the storm and vanish forever? But if she didn't, could the Bobcat survive the night? Minutes passed in suspended time. The storm howled louder, snow sweeping across the steps. Kiva blinked slowly, then looked at the door. Once, then again. That look wasn't accident. Marin set the mug down and crossed the room. She reached for the handle and hesitated, every instinct warning her not to ruin the moment. She opened the door only a few inches, just enough for scent and warmth to escape. Then she stepped back 5 feet, then 10, until she reached the far corner of the room. She sat on the rug, cross-legged, eyes soft but steady. Kiva rose slowly, the porch creaking beneath her weight. She took one cautious step, then another. Her paws were silent. Her nose twitched. Her ears swiveled. Marin held her breath. Then, with the grace of something born from shadow, Kiva crossed the threshold. She didn't look around. She didn't dart for cover. She walked past the doorway, past the boots and coat rack, and curled into the corner beneath the bookshelf, the very darkest part of the cabin. From there, she watched. Marin didn't speak, didn't move. She simply existed. And for the first time, they existed together. Marin left a small dish of water nearby and a bit of meat in a ceramic bowl she normally used for stew. Kiva didn't touch it, not yet, but she didn't growl, didn't hiss. The tension in her body was taut, but not panicked. That night, Maureen barely slept. She lay on the couch under a wool blanket, eyes half open, listening to the wind and the quiet presence in the room. Sometime after midnight, she heard soft movement pause on wood, the faintest sigh of breath. But when morning came, Kiva was still there, curled into herself, asleep. When Marin opened the door to check the storm, Kiva rose and padded over. She looked outside at the snow piled high, at the still snarling wind, and then turned back. She walked past the threshold and settled near the hearth, just a few feet closer to Maureen than before. It wasn't survival anymore. It was a choice. And Maureen felt something shift inside her, quiet, sacred, and utterly irreversible. She never asked for anything. No leash, no cage, no promise. But night after night, she came back. The blizzard passed, leaving the world blanketed in stillness. Marin's cabin looked like something out of a painting. Soft light glowing through frosted windows, smoke curling from the chimney, untouched snow sculpted into gentle drifts across the clearing. Inside, warmth hummed. The fire crackled low. And Kiva, still very much a creature of the wild, was curled beside the wood stove, her sides rising and falling in slow rhythm. Marin moved with care. She didn't speak unless necessary. Every action, setting down a mug, folding a blanket, was deliberate, respectful of the presence sharing her home. Kiva had claimed no territory, marked no corner, but somehow her being was everywhere. She didn't seek affection. She accepted cohabitation on her terms. Marin knew this couldn't last. Not like this. She wasn't keeping Kiva, but what if someone thought she was? What if the bobcat's comfort around the cabin was seen as domestication? What if Kiva got too close to another human one without patience or understanding? And then there was the other ache, the quiet yearning to reach out, to touch, to connect. But she didn't dare. One wrong move might sever the thread of trust they had so painstakingly built. Days turned into a week. Kiva began to explore at night. Marin would wake to find books shifted on low shelves, a pine cone resting by the fireplace, or a feather bright blue placed atop her desk. Once she found a perfectly intact field mouse beside her slippers. It was a gift. Kiva also began following Marin quietly, unobtrusively. If Marin read by the fire, Kiva lay within sight. If she typed at her desk, Kiva rested beneath it. Her presence was not intrusive, it was comforting. Marin stopped feeling alone. Still, there was no contact. Until one evening, Marin was sitting on the floor sorting field notes into folders. Kiva watched from a distance, eyes half-lidded. Then, silently, she rose. She walked across the room, paw's soundless tail steady. She stopped only a foot from Marin. Marin froze heart loud in her ears. Kiva lifted herself onto her hind legs, slowly, carefully, and pressed her forehead against Marin's shoulder. Marin didn't breathe. The gesture was so intimate, so vulnerable, that it shattered something quiet inside her. A deep, steady purr rose from Kiva's chest, a sound wild and ancient, and yet impossibly tender. Marin raised her hand inch by inch. Kiva didn't flinch. And then, for the first time, Marin's fingers touched the thick fur behind the bobcat's ears. It was softer than she had imagined. That night marked a turning point. Not a transformation. Kiva remained wild. But the trust was no longer fragile. It had roots now. The forehead press became ritual. When Kiva returned after a night out, she'd greet Marin that way. Sometimes she brought more gifts, bark with strange patterns, a leaf curled like a spiral. Marin never questioned them. She simply received them, honored. Marin began documenting every behavior, every shift. Her journals filled with not just scientific notes, but quiet awe. But outside their sanctuary, the world was still watching. One morning, while walking along the tree line, a man with binoculars froze at the sight of Kiva lounging on the porch. That afternoon, a green truck rolled into the clearing, and Marin knew this moment of peace would now be tested. I thought we were invisible, that no one else would see her. But the wild doesn't stay hidden forever. The morning was clear, cold, and quiet after a thaw. The snow had melted into patches of slick earth and exposed pine needles. Marin was gathering firewood along the edge of the clearing when she saw him, a man in a red coat, binoculars in hand, frozen mid-step. His eyes were locked on the porch, and there, stretching in the sun like a sleepy house cat, was Kiva. Later that afternoon, a green pickup truck rolled up the narrow road. Marin recognized the markings, Montana Fish and Wildlife. The man who stepped out was in his 40s, square-jawed, calm-eyed. Tomas Wilder, one of the local wardens. Marin had spoken to him once briefly when registering her research permit. He nodded politely. "Afternoon, Ms. Elwood. Got a call about a bobcat getting a little too friendly with human property. Mind if we talk?" Inside the cabin, the fire was lit, but the tension burned hotter. Kiva was under the bookshelf again, silent, but alert, golden eyes trained on Tomas. "She's not a pet," Marin said quickly. "She comes and goes. She's free. She's not confined." Tomas kept his hands in his jacket. "She's healthy. Maybe too healthy for a wild cat in February. That's what concerns people. If an animal becomes habituated to humans, loses fear, it can lead to conflict." Marin's throat tightened. "She's not dangerous. She's deliberate." Thomas stepped closer, eyes scanning the space with professional neutrality. You feeding her? Marin hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but she still hunts. I've seen her catch snowshoe hares. She's not dependent. Tomas gestured toward Kiva. Has she ever let you touch her? Marin didn't answer. Instead, she knelt slowly and extended her hand open palm. Kiva rose from her spot, walked forward, and pressed her forehead against Marin's fingers, just as she always did. Marin looked up. Tomas exhaled. Well, I'll be... He was quiet for a long moment, then walked to the small table where Marin's notebooks lay open. He flipped through a few pages, sketches, timestamps, behavioral patterns. You've documented all this, everything Marin said, from the first tracks in the snow to the first gift she left me. He closed the notebook gently. This is highly irregular, he muttered. Most cases like this end with relocation or worse. But this isn't reckless. It's rare. And strangely, respectful. Tomas stood. Here's the deal. As long as she remains free to leave, as long as there's no aggression, no complaints, I'll classify this as a monitored case. You keep documenting. You keep your door open literally and figuratively. But be discreet. If word spreads, the pressure changes. Relief flooded Marin's chest like thawed water under ice. Thank you. Truly. Tomas tipped his cap. She chose you, huh? Marin smiled, one hand resting softly on Kiva's back. No, she chose herself. I just didn't close the door. As Thomas drove away, Kiva returned to her place by the hearth. That night, Marin wrote a new line in her journal, "The wild can't be owned, but sometimes it can be trusted. And that trust is the rarest thing I've ever held, but the wild is never static." And when Kiva didn't return the next evening, Marin waited, then searched. And the silence that followed was louder than any storm. She was gone. No paw prints, no gifts, no sound. And I couldn't explain why the absence felt like grief. 3 days had passed. The cabin, once so full of quiet companionship, now felt hollow. Marin left the porch door ajar every evening, like always, just in case, but the bowls remained untouched. No feathers, no pine cones, no soft purring near the fire. Snow had fallen again, but it was shallow light enough that any movement would have left a trace. There were no traces. Marin stopped sleeping. She roamed the woods with binoculars and gloves, calling softly, not desperately, just hopefully. She walked the old paths Kiva had once padded along. She checked the tree line, the shelter under the porch, the edges of the frozen stream. The forest gave her nothing, no answers, no signs, just cold wind through branches and the far-off caw of crows. Was Kiva hurt, trapped, gone for good? Marin knew the risks. Kiva was wild. Freedom was part of the agreement, even if it had never been spoken aloud. But that didn't make the silence easier to bear. She found herself whispering to the empty room sometimes, "You're still mine, even if you're not here." Then she'd catch herself ashamed. Not mine. Never mine. Just missed. On the 4th evening, Marin lit the fire early and sat outside on the porch despite the cold. Wrapped in a wool coat mug of untouched tea in her hands, she stared into the growing dusk. The forest didn't owe her anything, but she whispered anyway. "Kiva, wherever you are, I hope it's warm." The sun dipped behind the ridge, shadows thickened, and then movement. At the far edge of the clearing a shape appeared, low, fluid, unmistakable. Kiva. She was thinner. A scratch cut across her nose, but she moved with purpose, determined, whole. Marin didn't move. She didn't stand, didn't cry out, just watched, heart in her throat. Kiva crossed the snow slowly, eyes fixed on her. When she reached the steps, she paused. For a long moment, they only stared at each other. Woman and wildcat both changed by days apart. Then, Kiva climbed the steps. Without hesitation, she pressed her forehead against Marin's knee harder than ever before. Her purr was fierce, steady, a sound like a motor deep in her chest. Marin let the tears come silent and grateful. "You came back," she whispered. Kiva padded inside and went straight to the hearth. She curled up without fanfare, as if nothing had happened, as if no days had passed. Marin followed, closed the door gently, and sat beside the fire. She didn't need to speak. The room felt whole again, not because of ownership or comfort, but because of presence. Later that night, Marin wrote, "She leaves. She returns. That is her nature, and I will never hold her tighter than the moment she chooses to stay." In the months that followed, Kiva remained wild. Some weeks she disappeared for days. Other times she slept every night beside the bookshelf. She still brought gifts. She still greeted with that quiet press of the forehead. But Marin no longer feared the silence. She had learned that trust is not measured by proximity, but by return. And in the dance between distance and closeness, they had found something sacred. Not ownership, not taming, but belonging.